The Renaissance, a transition period between medieval and modern ages. It began in the 14th century and continued till the 16th. It reached its apex in the 15th century. The word Renaissance originates from the French word renaître, which translates to rebirth. The Renaissance witnessed a general reawakening, revival, or rebirth of learning. It was the age of exploration, which led to using scientific research to solve problems. The invention of the printing press in 1423 in Europe, and consequently the wide availability of books, dramatically advanced literacy in schooling, and initiated the information revolution. The Renaissance period witnessed the rise of several movements. One of the most important ones was Humanism. Humanism is derived from the Latin word humanitas, which means culture. It began in Italy in the 14th century and continued to the 16th century. The educators of that era were called classical humanists. They considered themselves critics and custodians of knowledge. Great writers of their age, such as Dante, Petrarch, and Boccaccio, wrote in Italian rather than Latin. Boccaccio was the founder of vernacular literature, which was literature written in the language of the land rather than in Latin. Humanists kept their distance from the mass of people, for they believed humanist education should be reserved for the elite. They emphasized on the humanistic aspect of Greek and Latin classics, hence focused on literature rather than religious studies known as theology. Hence they adopted a system of thought that centers on humans and their values, capacities, and worth. Their goal was to educate critically minded people who could challenge existing customs and expose and correct mediocrity in literature and life, thus producing complete citizens who would contribute to civic life. Access to schools in that age was still limited. Preparatory and secondary schools were reserved for children of nobility and upper classes, in addition to talented individuals of the other classes. Elementary schools were designed for the commercial middle class. Students belonging to the lower socio-economical class had access to little, if any, formal education. One of the leading humanist scholars and critics of the Renaissance was Desiderius Erasmus. He believed education was for everybody. He focused on the unifying features of Christianity rather than the doctrines that separated believers. He recognized the importance of shaping a child's predisposition to education early in life. Hence, he advised parents and teachers to be worthy cultural and ethical models. According to Erasmus, teachers were described as cosmopolitan Christian humanists. They needed to have an ecumenical and global outlook, not limited by narrow interests. Therefore, as pre-service teachers, they had to be well educated in liberal arts, especially Greek and Latin literature, history, writing, philosophy, and religion. He suggested motivating students to read good books and explore an author's meaning, and set a method for doing so. First, the author's biography was presented. Genre identification followed. Then the plot was discussed. After that, students reflected on the book's moral and philosophical implications, and finally they analyzed the author's writing style. As for those who tutored a prince, Erasmus, as an opposer of violence and war, advised that they made sure the prince had enough knowledge of his kingdom, their traditions, customs, work, and problems. The prince was also advised to gain his subjects' love and trust in order to rule peacefully, diplomatically, and avoid war. So how did the Renaissance contribute to Western education? Renaissance humanists emphasized on the knowledge of Latin and Greek. For centuries and up till the late 19th century, many universities and colleges in Europe and the United States required knowledge of Latin for admission. It is important to note that Erasmus and other classical humanists were moving to a human-centered conception of knowledge that was later challenged by Rousseau, Pestalozzi, Spencer, and Dewey, who argued against instructions that emphasized literature exclusively while neglecting experience. Humanist criticism of scholastic authorities and their quest for secularism weakened the Catholic Church's central authority, shifting people's loyalty away from the Pope and to their own monarchs, thus stimulating the emergence of the Protestant religious Reformation in the 16th and 17th centuries. John Calvin, Martin Luther, Philip Melanchthon, and Ulrich Zwingli sought to free themselves of papal authority and to interpret their own religious doctrines and practices. They founded their own educational theories, established their own schools, structured their own curricula, and reared their children in the Reformed creeds or systems of beliefs. They asserted that every person had the right to read the Bible. They established vernacular schools to instruct students in their own common language. Teacher supervision and licensing was developed during the Reformation period. To ensure the conformity of the taught doctrine, catechism, a question and answer method of teaching, was developed, thus reinforcing memorization. Reformers wanted both sexes to attend primary vernacular schools, but still preparatory and secondary schools were reserved for upper-class boys, the elite that was destined for leadership and roles in the church and state. Martin Luther was one of the most important religious reformers. He had grown critical of the Catholic Church, thus challenged the authority of the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church in his writings. Luther recognized education as an ally of religious reformation, and saw church, state, and family as reform agencies. He encouraged family Bible reading and prayer, while making sure children had vocational training to support themselves and hence become productive citizens. Luther emphasized schooling's political, economical, and spiritual benefits, and insisted that schools should be organized and inspected by state officials to make sure teachers are educating children in correct religious doctrines and training them to become literate, orderly, and productive citizens. Luther's emphasis on reading the Bible in one's own language meant that girls as well as boys were to attend primary school. Martin Luther relied heavily on Philip Melanchthon, a humanist educator, to design and implement educational reforms. In 1559, Melanchthon drafted the School Code of Wittenberg that specified that primary vernacular schools be established in every town to teach students religion, reading, writing, arithmetic, and music. Classical secondary schools like the German Gymnasium were to provide Latin and Greek instructions for those expected to attend universities. But how did the Reformation contribute to Western education? The Protestant Reformation reconfirmed the dual-track system of schools that was brought to the New World by European colonists. And through their stress on Bible reading, Protestant reformers emphasized on literacy, which helped accelerate the movement towards universal schooling. In the 18th century, however, religious influence over education was challenged by movements of the Age of Reason, the Enlightenment, an intellectual and philosophical movement that centered on the value of human happiness, the pursuit of knowledge obtained by means of reason and evidence of senses, in addition to ideals such as liberty, progress, constitutional government, and separation of church and state.